Typically, the buyer relationship is they supply a widget at X price, hopefully at a certain date. And the supplier receives the good, raw material, they put it into their manufacturing line, so it's a very transactional relationship. In a value-oriented supply chain, it becomes much more collaborative. The buyer is a lot more interested in the supplier's operations, and really even downstream, where the supplier source their raw materials from. Because if the supplier is not able to make the component that the ultimate buyer's ordered, then it obviously affects their supply chain. So everything, the supply chain, both all of the participants in that buyer, supplier, and the other interested parties, it becomes a much more collaborative and a holistic relationship. So it has a lot more value to the organization as a whole, and that's why it presents itself as a lot more of an asset. It can produce those kind of contributions. So other than, now being the time, being 2015, and companies making a move in that direction, I would suggest that if they were to benchmark themselves against other companies in their industry that they consider to be peers, and they weren't doing as well from a profit margin perspective or operational excellence perspective, that they certainly should start to look at their supply chain as a room for, or an area for improvement within their company, because there's definitely a trend in the market now. Companies are understanding that the supply chain is much more than just a conduit to move product from one location to the other, that actually can become a strategic asset for the company. So from a talent perspective, there's this concept of the supply chain evangelist, which I think is extremely crucial. Whether that individual's internal, whether it's a new hire to the corporation, whether they outsource it to a consultancy, that role is extremely important to play. So they need to make sure that they understand and have somebody in that role that has good communication skills, understands the business, and to some extent can be kind of associated with the politics behind some operational change. And the other is the actual supply chain team themselves. They need to understand their role and their department's role, but they also need to understand the bigger picture, because what we understand is that supply chain, once it becomes a value creation asset, it really has to be done from a holistic approach, which means that everybody contributes, but nobody is the sole answer or the sole reason for issues within the supply chain. The second category is around technology. Supply chain management systems like our One SCM is a collaboration portal where you can link buyers and suppliers together and to collaborate between those business practices. There's also business intelligence. Companies can use BI solutions to mine data relative to the supply chain to help them make decisions from an analytical perspective and to perhaps change business processes ahead of potential issues that may happen downstream. And then there's the area of forecasting and planning, and then there's the area of transportation and logistics. All of those have some component of technology. The business process is owned by the operational people, but the discipline and the continued quality practices are really delivered through the use of technology. And the third area is really around processes or operational processes. Again, there's areas like planning and forecasting. There's areas like procure to pay. Again, our One SCM solution, really what it does for a company is it provides a level of automation, a level of consistency, and it allows them to really run their procure to pay process on a management by exception process. So they're not having to touch every order, every invoice that comes in. If it matches either a three-way or four-way match based on their company best practices, it flows through the system, and then they just spend time managing the issues that are outside of whatever tolerances they set up. So it's a combination of processes linked with technology and obviously talent that underlies all of those components that companies really need to look at those three main areas as far as how they make the move to a value-based supply chain. If leadership doesn't support and understand the value, it'll never succeed. So the first thing they should do is gain executive sponsorship. And I'll link this back to the concept earlier of the supply chain evangelist. It doesn't have to be a person from outside the company, but quite often companies move in that direction because that person can really focus on the operational excellence and processes underlying that and not get so worried about the politics. But leadership, certainly at the C level of a company, whatever the right levels are, need to support this, need to understand it, and most importantly, to make sure that the people, the supply chain talent that we talked about earlier, understand their role, because they're all very key to the success and the movement of a company to this value-based supply chain concept. If a company does not make this shift, they will certainly not realize their full potential from a profit perspective. I won't go so far as to say they'll go out of business, because I think there's companies out there based on, maybe industries that they can get away with, a supply chain that's not as leading edge as others. But they'll never realize the full potential, in my opinion, that company would have to create profit for its shareholders. So ultimately, something that used to be looked at as transactional, very movement of goods from one location to the other. Now with the right talent, with the right technology and the right processes in place, can really be used and can consider it a valuable asset. And if they're not looking at that and treating it that way, then I believe their company, while they'll remain in business, will certainly not be as profitable and have the growth rates that other peer companies or industry do.